All right, so who's going to be the first brave soul?
Hi, great talk, very motivating, inspiring. And it's about what you mentioned in the talk about the success team. Can you talk a little bit more about it? Like, is it people in your same branch, or is it like really good friends that care about you but may do really other things? And do you have a success team? How do you do it? Like, do you talk once a week, twice a week, or once a month?
Yeah. Great. By the way, it's a great way, if you ever want more time to talk, you just say, I'm going to talk about it in the Q&A, and then you get time to talk in the Q&A. So yeah, a success team is people that care about your dream. It can be people that are close to you and care about you. Again, I'm very suspicious with people that are too close to you, because then they're involved in your success, and then they become risk averse. You want people that are not attached to your risk at all. They wouldn't be hurt in any way if you fail. That means it's not your mother. Okay? So that, and the other thing is they don't have to be close friends. They have to be people who might care about your dream. They want you to succeed because they love the same thing. So if it's an interest group that you're part of, and you say, yeah, but I'm going to work on that thing, and they, oh, yeah, this is great that you're going to work on it. So you choose who really care. It can start with one person. It can grow to 6 people. I actually love the idea of being a success team for each other, so you keep each other accountable. You meet once in a while. You commit to some actions between now and the next time, and you write them down, and you ask them to make sure that they're keeping you accountable to your plan. So you always not just think, and because a lot of people are, in Hebrew we have this term called paka paka, you know? Which means, oh, this guy's talking, but he never acts. Which is, don't be that person who just talks about being the best in that, but never acts. So this success team is a mechanism. You don't have to have it, by the way. If you're very motivated and you see yourself act, you don't need a success team. But that's, in a nutshell, what it is. I can go in more specific, but I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Let me add, so thank you for your question. I should have said this at the beginning. Just want to remind you of some guidelines for the question. So please state your question as a question. Please state it as briefly as you can. And if you have a comment, we'd like to avoid comments, but if you have a comment and you're already at the mic, I'm not going to pull you away and kick you out. So just make it as brief as possible. Thank you.
Hello, I have a question about ethics and mainly about the origin of rights. Yesterday you told, or you said that animals don't have rights, and the reason that you gave was that they don't have rights because they cannot grasp the concept right, and they cannot even keep anyone else's rights as well. Then my question is, what do you think then about babies? Do they have rights? And similar, for example, mentally disabled people, like Down disease, do they also have rights?
What was the second example?
People with Down, for example, mentally disabled people.
Down syndrome.
Yeah. Yes,
I don't know if my voice
Down
is
syndrome.
gone. This works. Okay. Sorry, my voice is gone. I think I'm just dying here. So, but I liked answering your questions, so I can't deal with it. So, yeah. So animals don't have rights because these are, like as you said. I won't repeat it, but I think it's right. Yeah, babies have children have rights in the sense that they will come to the point in their own life where they're in a context where they will be in a position to understand rights. Those principles that rights kind of isolate are the principles that they will need to live throughout their life, and in effect, their parents are kind of custodians of them until the time in which they kind of come into the of an age where this is how they need to function. But these are the principles that child will need to have respected and stuff, to let it flourish and stuff. It's just not at the age yet to understand, but it will. Your dog isn't, and I don't mean that to be funny. They're just different organisms in that sense. So in the sense, like your child is not going to vote, your child is not going to decide to sign a contract. There are all sorts of things that they won't be able to do because they're not in a position to understand it, and so they're not really in a context where they're engaging at that level, but they will. And that's relevant to the kind of organism they are. Did you have, there was another aspect to the question.
Yeah, but
Oh, disabled people.
yesterday when you spoke about animal rights, you gave the reason why they don't have rights is because they don't grasp the concept of rights. But babies also don't get that concept. And they can also not keep someone else's rights as well. Similar as, for example, mentally disabled people as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's something similar. Well, wait, go ahead. Oh, okay, yeah, so for a mentally disabled person, there's a sense in which they don't have full rights. And they may never. So one thing is they don't have full rights because they'll probably never, they're in a context where they're probably never going to be able to really understand what it is or to be able to function at that level. And in effect, they're, since, like, let's see, if me and my wife had a child, for example, that had Down syndrome, I've worked with Down kids as a coach. It's very hard work, but if it's my child and it's a human being, and you're in effect, it's your child, you know, and it's a human being, and they have rights in that respect. You can't just go to throw them away and throw them in the trash or something as if they don't have rights because they don't understand it. The other thing is, I wouldn't put any sort of arbitrary or too hasty limits on what science can achieve in terms of curing their condition. So they could come to the point where they can be in a position where they can come into full rights. It depends. I wouldn't put the kind of limits on a child like that. But we're going.
Oh,
Yeah, but
okay.
I'm interested in the question. I just don't want to turn it into a conversation.
Yeah.
This is on free will versus determinism. The whole realm of morality and politics, of course, rests on the fact of free will. What would the determinists like Harris say, or how would they respond to the fact that without free will, I think the whole realm of morality collapses, politics collapses, even justice, criminal justice, no one is good or bad if everyone is determined. Do they have any counter-arguments, or how would they respond?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing issue in the debate in free will and determinism. And if you bring up criminal justice, you'll get this kind, well, here's one kind of answer. You'll get this kind of parallel that, look, you might not think, and many people don't, that animals, so we were talking about other animals have free will, yet you still engage in punishment and reward for and you're trying to control their behavior and so on. And that is, in essence, what a criminal justice system is meant to do. Now, I don't think that, in essence, is what it is meant to do. But you can see that parallel of thinking there's such a thing as animal training, and you have rewards and punishments in it. And you don't have to view the animal as having free will in order to do that. Now, I don't think that's what you actually do with human beings, or what you should do in regard to human beings, because I think human beings do have free will. But there are answers to some of these kinds of questions. But the more you put it in terms of morality, and the more you're offering guidance to people. And guidance means this is what you should choose. Choose this, not that. And the more you're doing that and saying, yeah, but you're determined, of course, then, like, what are you offering me guidance about? What is it you want me to do exactly? You want me to make some choice, but you're telling me I don't have a choice about this? So, and that starts to become really incoherent. But for some of these things, and for criminal justice and so on, they have replies of how they view it and so on, and you don't have to think of it as the things have choice in regard to that. Now, I don't think a proper criminal justice system, it has to take into account the fact that it has choice, and the things that you have, things like, just think of some of what is in our criminal justice system that I think is if you think about it, the root is free will and thinking about free will. So that you think of something that it's sort of, you killed someone, but it's more accidental that you killed someone. It was sort of through negligence versus premeditated murder. And you think the punishment for these things should be different. The reason you think the punishment should be different is the exercise of free will and the choices the person is making. One is he's carried out carefully over time a plan to murder this person. Another is just he's not really paying enough attention to what he should be, and he runs someone over in his car or something late at night. And you think of these, and I think rightly, as these are different situations because the people are making different choices. And this is embedded in the criminal justice system. And I think when you start comparing it to animals and so on, you don't get anything like this. So I don't think that comparison doesn't work in the end, but they have some answers to this kind of issue.
Hi, once again. So if you are willing to share some personal stories, I would like to stress out the point Tal was making on figure how to get paid doing learning and doing what you love before you're learning. So would you share how or when did you learn, figure out how to get paid doing what you love and learning objectivism and intellectual work?
I'm a philosopher, I don't get paid. Well, I don't know what to say. When I was going to school, my preparation was, this is the super short story. I read Ayn Rand, she sold me on philosophy. And I went back to school. I had quit as soon as I read Ayn Rand because I didn't have any clue what I was doing with my life. Spent the next 2 years reading Rand. She sold me on philosophy. I went back to school. I did something else. I did wait tables or whatever. I taught gymnastics all through my undergraduate and graduate school until I got accepted into a PhD program. And then, of course, they give you a tuition waiver and they give you a stipend. So they started me at, I don't know, $12,000 a year, $13,000 a year, whatever. They give you money, which is cool. And I got married happily. My wife had a salary as well. And so, the circumstances were such that, I wasn't going to starve, as he said. And then I enrolled in the Objectivist Academic Center as well as a graduate student. And I don't think I didn't have to pay any tuition for that because ARI covered it. So again, I'm learning from Onkar and some other people at the Institute. And then I got a job as a professor and they gave me a salary. And then ARI asked me to work for them and they gave me a salary. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
This is not a...
Maybe, I don't know if you can answer, Elan or Onkar, the realization that philosophy is what you want to do. When did that happen? I'm actually interested as well, so I'm helping you out.
So for me, it was I was interested in philosophy before I was interested in objectivism, and I started getting interested particularly in issues of morality, about good and evil, and I had some recognition pretty early on in my teenage years that the way I think about it is different than the way other people think about it, and that what I regard as good, often people don't regard it as good, and what I regard as bad, people often regard as good. And it was, so then I got, but I was I was philosophical, so I got to so the question is, so what is good and evil? And maybe I should research that. So I started reading about that, and that's how I started reading philosophy. And that's how I got, then someone told me, well, if you're interested in this kind of question, you should read Atlas Shrugged. And that's how I discovered objectivism. But I started getting interested in philosophical questions first. And then I thought, yeah, okay, this is the best answer I've been offered of what I'm reading, so I'm going to explore objectivism more. And that's how I got passionate about objectivism.
I was just going to build on something that Tal said, because you put it in the context of find a way to pursue your passion and learn. And so that's a case where someone is identifying maybe a new direction that they're going in. But often, I think, for some people, they don't know what their passion is, and it's a process of learning on the job. So one thing I would say, sort of as a broader point, learning is something you should be doing every day. It's not something that you set aside time for. I think one of the things I like about my work is that it's essentially about gaining new knowledge and sharing with people. So I think in any job that you have, if you're really being active-minded, because I've had all kinds of jobs that are really, really boring, and I try to make them interesting. Super boring, like washing dishes in a lab wearing a hazmat suit. Not a fun job. But I made it interesting, or I had a job where I was filling out a lot of paperwork. So I set a timer, and I said, I want to be able to fill this form out perfectly in a minute instead of 15 minutes. And then it's how, 45 seconds, and it's just becoming more, and then I figured out, well, I could put this on a spreadsheet and learn how to do spreadsheets, and I won't have to fill out the form. And so whatever job you have, and then I discovered, I really love spreadsheets. I'm a spreadsheet geek, actually, and that helped me get another job, and I earned a lot more money that way. But so I think in any position that you have, if you take your work seriously and try to do the best work you can, it's a trigger to learning something, and then you discover, wow, there's this whole thing called a spreadsheet, and you can do amazing things with it, and maybe this is a path for me. So I think the learning, and that can be the path into a passion for you. Just a quick personal story, what got me interested in the work that I do, the intellectual work that I do, it was Ayn Rand who got me interested in ideas and in philosophy. And then I read the book by Leonard Peikoff, which is an application of Ayn Rand's theory to culture, and it's an explanation of how the rise of Germany, how Nazism rose in Germany. It's called The Ominous Parallels. And I read that and I thought, wow, she's right. Philosophy is everywhere, and it's incredibly powerful, and if you understand it, it really helps you understand the world. And I thought, I want to do something, I can't do that because somebody else has done it, but I want to do something that it's like that. It's taking philosophy, using it to understand the world and sharing that with other people. And so that, I realized I want to do that. I don't exactly know how you do that, way you do it. Is it journalism? Is it academia? I wasn't sure. And for me, I just want to plug the Ayn Rand Institute where I work, because for me, being at the Ayn Rand Institute was both a job and a learning experience. And I'm learning every day. I mean, I work with Aaron and Onkar every day.
But what I want to say, you figured out a way to get close to Leonard Peikoff by doing something with his radio show and something like that, right?
My first job at the Institute was working on the Leonard Peikoff radio show, which was a really amazing experience to work with someone that brilliant. So that's true.
Oh, he found his Alan Kay. That's
I wish I could say it was that well thought out, but it was just an opportunity that came along. But so that's just one story.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask 2 questions about Ayn Rand's literalist style, which is romantic realism. Firstly, I read in the Romantic Manifesto that Ayn Rand said the reason why the reason why romanticism is better in literary style than naturalism is that, for example, Gail Wynand, the principles of life of Gail Wynand is applicable to many people, like to all of it, many store clerks, but the principles of life of a store clerk is not necessarily applicable to another store clerk. So I wanted to exactly understand this quotation. And the second part is that, does romantic realism need to be accurate, or is it just enough that metaphysically it's possible?
I didn't quite catch what was the second part.
For example, We the Living describes a very accurate history in Russia. Describes the city of St. Petersburg very accurately. I was thinking, does romantic realism need to be state things around accurately?
I see. Okay. On the first question, so I don't think that's quite accurate in what the Romantic Manifesto is saying. So one of the things she says is that the struggles and the situation, not the principles, the struggles and the situation of a Gail Wynand, who's a character and a very conflicted character in The Fountainhead, is at a scale that is translatable easy to other people's lives. And if it's the struggles of a grocery clerk that are very particular, very small, very narrow, it's hard to see that as this is an issue that man faces. And when she's talking about serious literature, she's talking about literature that addresses serious themes, but in the end that means philosophical themes, and it means importantly metaphysical themes, including a man's metaphysical nature. So issues that human beings as such face. And part of what she thinks about romanticism is they present it on a scale that anyone can see. And this is, I think thinks it's true of her novels, but it's what she responds to. For instance, her favorite novelist was Victor Hugo. And what she admires about him is the ingenuousness of the story, the plot, but of the characterization and the grand scale characters. And when you have the struggle of Jean Valjean to redeem himself, people can see if they're struggling to, like, there's something in my life that I think I did wrong and so on, and I want to earn redemption, and what do I do? They can see in this wide-scale story of a kind of proportions that are, it's going through a period in France, so that you can see and say, like, my struggle's like that. The reverse is really hard, that you get a very particular study of a very detailed character that, like, how does this translate to me? It seems very different. So when you get this grand scale projection, that's what you can translate. But it's not an issue of the principles. The principles are the same for anyone. It's the grasp of them and seeing the projection. I think that is what she's talking about in regard to romanticism. The realism does not mean, so when she described herself as a romantic realist, it does not mean she takes very detailed historical episode in history and that is what I'm going to write about. What the realism means, what she thought happened to romanticism, so she's essentially a romantic writer. And Romanticism was a school in the 19th century and an approach to literature that was self-conscious, like this is what we're doing, and it's a whole approach to literature and to art. But what she thought happens, and I think this is right if you read the romantic literature of the 19th century, it very rarely deals with real world problems. And that's not the issues of a particular historical period, but the problems we're facing today. And Les Miserables of Jean Valjean's, the story of Jean Valjean, is one of the exceptions, that it deals with the underclass in French society, but the underclass sort of generally in the 19th century, that they're treated unjustly, which was true, I think, of the 19th century. It's dealing with an actual problem that people are facing and living with now. But it rarely did that, and there was a reason that it rarely did that, because it didn't know how to deal with these problems, because it didn't have a right morality, so it couldn't do what it wanted. So it retreats to the Middle Ages and to having characters of princes and so on, and how of a businessman in the 19th century and so on. How does this relate to me exactly? And it's very hard to get that. And when she's writing, so We the Living is set in a historical period in Russia. The Fountainhead is set in the US. She liked Atlas Shrugged the best, and Atlas Shrugged is an invention. It's a projection of the US in the future. It's not a historical period now. She liked that novel the best and thought it was most her because it's her at her most inventive. So the realism doesn't mean, oh, there's something wrong with Atlas because it's not a particular historical period. What's realistic about it is the issues that we face today. We face the conflict of individualism versus collectivism, and more particularly, you face the conflict of reason versus mysticism and egoism versus altruism. And these are the kinds of conflicts that Atlas Shrugged is dealing. And that's what makes it realistic, not that can you locate this in a particular point in time.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, every action would be rational ex ante, given all the information we have and the power of the mind that we possess. And ex post, every decision can be wrong because we find new information that if we had in the first place, would have made our decision more rational in the first place. However, that's strictly ex post. If I understood correctly, the objectivists don't hold this view of rationality. So, am I wrong?
Are you saying that if you follow rational methods, but it turns out the conclusion that you reached was false, is that still rational? Is that the question?
Well, would every action be called rational even if you don't follow whatever you define as rationality? Because given the information you have, you always make the best choice because you always want to have the best decision made for yourself, even if that decision hurts you. Even at the same moment, even ex post?
Well, you would have to know more of the situation to answer that, I think. But if I take the general question is, can you be rational and mistaken, or rational and you end up, if you're in the pursuit of values, you end up with something that you don't think is good, Yes, I think the basic answer to that is yes, but you need a lot of the details to flesh out why the answer is yes and how to think about it. But the rationality means you're actively trying to the best of your ability, but including the best of your knowledge about how to reason and how to think. I'm trying to figure out what's true or what's good for me. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get to the right answer. And you can look back later and say, from the later perspective, that was a stupid decision, and yet simultaneously think, if I had to do it again, I'd do exactly the same thing, because what I knew then and how I thought about it and what I was able to figure out, this is what seemed to me the best answer, and I would do that again. And yet you look from a later perspective and say, yeah, that was pretty stupid, but you couldn't figure that out at the time. And that happens in life, and you should not beat yourself up in regard to this, and particularly in a moral context. This is why one of the reasons I emphasize, it's an issue of effort. The question morally is, did you try to figure it out? And you learn things more every day and every day and every day, and you often have a perspective, like, how did I even function with what I knew then, given what I know now, and that now I know what to do? And that's a common occurrence in life, and it's a fact of life, that as you learn, you get better and better at things.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to the mental disability question. As far as I understand, the basic reason why individuals possess rights is because of their rational faculty, not because they're particularly smart or sharp. Further, it seems to me that most mentally disabled people do have a rational faculty. They can grasp the concept of the abstraction of furniture, and therefore, it seems to me, at least in principle, they would be able to grasp the concept of individual rights, even if they're unlikely to ever realize this potential. But frankly, I think even highly intelligent people today are unlikely to ever realize this potential. So I was wondering why mentally disabled people are essentially different with respect to their individual rights.
So let me take a wider perspective on this question and say something, I'll put it in a controversial way. People don't have rights. So in the way that most people ask that question, and I think it's in both of these questions, the idea that you get in the 17th and 18th century, that the ultimate ground for rights is they come from God. So it's God implants a right in you and a right in you, or he doesn't. We're not giving rights. He didn't give them to women, so they don't have rights. Or he didn't give them to blacks, so they don't have rights. That's the whole conception it's not actual conception in the 17th, 18th century. It's the ultimate justification they give. They give other better reasons than that. And that's how people think of it now. But it's not God giving it, but it's someone else giving you this. And the question is, did they give it to you or not? That's not what rights are. Rights were created, they're political principles. And they were created as we're facing a political problem of how do we live together in a society, and if you think of European societies that are tearing themselves up over religious wars and all kinds of issues, but religion was a major, major issue. How do we create a society in which we can live and prosper as individuals? And from that perspective, rights are essentially a concept that applies to adults. They're not asking the question of how does it apply to animals, how does it apply to kids? They're not asking that question. How does it apply to the mentally retarded? They're asking the question, how does it apply to a normal individual adult who can function, who is rational and so on? Yes. How do we create a system in which they can live? And it's a later than issue of, okay, so what do you think then about children? What do you think about the mentally retarded and so on? Or the handicapped? And the issue then is, these are principles that apply to all these. They apply as a potential to children. They apply to the handicapped or the mentally retarded in the sense that these are the conditions in which a human being flourishes. He has to have a right to life, a right to liberty, a right to property, a right to the pursuit of happiness. And it is true of this person who, for whatever reason, someone brought up, I think the earlier question was Down syndrome, that's true of them. And the reason you think of them as they have a problem is because they can't actually exercise these rights, or they can't fully exercise them. And then the issue is, yeah, okay, so there's a sense in which these principles apply to them, but there's a sense in which they can't fully exercise them. What often happens is, okay, it's a custodian who exercises the rights for them. They can't enter into all kinds of contracts, but either their parents can, or who's now in charge of them, they can enter into contracts, sign a lease to rent a place and so on. But it's all a very derivative issue. And there's not a perspective of, well, did someone give it to them? These are principles to organize political society. And then there's the question, okay, then what do we say about these people who can't act rationally or fully rationally? And then there's things to be said about that, but it's a very derivative issue. And if one treats it as a primary, one's not understanding what the concept of rights is.
Yeah, I certainly agree that individual rights are an abstract principle rather than something given to humans naturally by God. My question is, why does this principle not apply to mentally disabled people? Aren't they, at least in principle, able to exercise the rights, even if that would be very difficult for them?
I think that the question you're asking turns on what do you mean mentally disabled? If you mean somebody has a learning disability, that's not, I think, what the questioner that I was responding to was asking. It depends on the severity. If they simply can't function, they can't speak, they can't communicate, that's a kind of a mental disability. It's also could be something much more mild, and that you would say, oh, their rights, your parents have to make all their decisions. No, it's not true. So I think that might depend on what you're talking about. And
all right. So
let's move on.
If you want to go back to the end of the line, just not fair for the other people. Thanks.
So yeah, Ayn Rand refers to her philosophy as a closed one or complete one. So how do we deal with new problems?
One second. Did she ever said it's closed one?
I don't know the whole translation of the quote exactly, but it was like the complete one, something like this. And how do we deal with new problems that arise with advancements of technology, with the advancement of history, as objectivists? For example, the problem that will arise with the development of artificial intelligence. How do we address problems, philosophical problems, as objectivists?
So let me say a word on the closed and open, and then come to the issue of the example of artificial intelligence.
So that was just an example.
Yeah. So she said what she said. Objectivism is the name of her philosophy. It names her philosophy. I don't think she ever said it's closed. She certainly never said philosophy is closed. I don't think she even said it was complete, in the sense there aren't more philosophical questions and that you have to explore and that are interesting, and that she would develop theories about. At the end of her life, she's working on issues about mathematics and how it relates in epistemology and how it relates to induction and so on. And it's like there's a lot of further philosophical questions to explore. So there's not an issue of it being either complete, in the sense there's no other philosophical question that needs addressing, nor that it's closed. It's closed in the sense when she dies, it's a name of her philosophy. There's nothing now more to her philosophy. She's not around to have new theories, new ideas. And so in that sense, it closed with her death. Philosophy doesn't close. It's just objectivism. It's the name of her philosophy. So it ends when she dies. And there's a difference between thinking of, here's a new philosophical idea, theory, principle, and I think there will be in the development of knowledge. And so there will be new philosophy. And if you were asking what its relationship to objectivism is, it's then everyone will have to think, like, do I think this is compatible with objectivism? So you can view it as in terms of philosophical knowledge in addition to it. Do I think it's getting something that objectivism was wrong about and this gets it right? And in that sense, and just as in other sciences, it will say that, like, we're neo-Darwinist. We think the essence of what Darwin said is right, but not everything in his theory was right. Here's a different view, and they don't say, okay, now this is Darwin's theory. No, this is a new theory. It has a relationship to what Darwin was arguing, and you would relate it like that. But the kind of question you're asking about artificial intelligence, it's not obvious there's new philosophical issues. There's issues of application, of thinking, how do the the principles apply in this new context with this new technology and so on.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of things to do in that, but we do that regularly at the Institute. I mean, to take one of the things that we spend a lot of time on, after 9/11, how do you think about this? How should we respond? How do you think about American foreign policy? It's all an issue of application of objectivist ideas, but it's not a new part of philosophy. It's an application.
Okay, so maybe to clarify, how exactly do you deal with those new application problems in order to stay true to objectivism?
I would just say you think about them. I mean, I don't know what more.
Yeah, and I don't agree psychologically that's not what my mind would do. My mind would think, how do I think about the issue and what are the answers to it? Not what's an appropriate objectivist-oriented answer to the question. Now, objectivism is a philosophy that I think is true, and so I'm coming from that perspective. But the issue isn't how do I make this consistent or with objectivism. It's more what do I think about the issue. So that's not where my mind would go. I don't think it's where one's mind should go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you. My question is, I actually would like to go back to Aaron's discussion about the emotional reason and like emotional appeal and reasoning. So, you know, there's these situations when you engage into a discussion and you see that your partner becomes defensive because he feels that when you argue on his beliefs, he feels personally attacked. So what advice could you give in order to avoid entering such situations?
Give me a second. No, really.
Do you want to think on it?
Yeah, let me think about it because I get in these situations. I don't have a difficulty talking to people about these. Some people are triggered. My wife and I do a lot of restauranting, and people are like, hey, what do you do? and it's always goofy for me because I'm a philosopher. It sounds kind of weird, but they think it's cool. And they say, so, what do you do? And I say, work at the Ayn Rand Institute. Well, the bomb goes off usually. But they ask a lot of questions. And like, so what are you saying that such and such? And, and I tell them how I think about the issue. It's not like, yeah, your views are stupid or that you're wrong to think that. It's just like, so in terms of engagement is the way I think about the issue is like, what are you going to do about the poor or whatever? It's like the way I think about the issue is this. And so these are the kind of values that I'm trying to protect or honor when I'm taking the position that I'm doing. And I know that, and I'm aware that this is, and it's good to address, I'm aware that this is not a mainstream view. And there are reasons why people think differently, and you might think very differently than me, but if you take the issue about these are the reasons why I think about it, and so you stop butting heads over the conclusions and start talking about the reasons. I mean, if you can ask, why do you think that these, like, what do you think of that? Kind of bring them into the conversation. So if you say, well, these are the reasons why I think it, what do you think? What do you think about that? And so you take them seriously. And they say, well, yeah, sure, okay, that sounds fine. Usually it kind of tones down a little bit. Yeah, but what, I think this is important. And so I think that's important too. Just the framework from the way I look at this is if we take that option, my concern is that we're going to erode these things, and I think they're really important to the issue. And it's not about you got the wrong view, this is how I think about it. And then you start talking about the reasons, and you start expecting reasons. And then you can ask about their reasons. And it shows interest, and not faking it, but it shows interest, and it shows a respect for ideas, and I think that tends to prompt toward a better exchange. And be more civil than they are. Like, really. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have something to add to that. So I agree with your general pattern. I think it's effective to do that. I would give you 3 pointers on this. One is to recognize that partly it's a communication skill. So the kinds of things that Aaron is raising, putting things in terms of what you believe, not you should, you know, versus I believe this, and then it invites the other person to say, well, why do you believe that? And then it becomes more of a conversation. So there's a kind of communication thing, and there are good books about how to communicate effectively so that people don't shut down, because I mean, it's a fact, it's not limited to philosophy that people get triggered and defensive. I mean, I talk to my kids about things they do and no, I didn't do it. So it happens everywhere. You talk to an employee, you have to think about how to communicate something that's difficult. You don't want them to shut down, you want them to take the feedback and grow. So it's a common phenomenon, and there's some good kind of communication things you can learn. So one is recognize that there's tools you can find, and some of what Aaron raised, I think, is right. Number two, is to recognize that those skills will only take you so far, because the kinds of ideas that we've been talking about, if you think about Onkar's keynote and some of the other presentations we've had, in the end, these are challenging ideas. So there's no way around the fact that the more people think about them, the more they'll see the implications that, okay, well, if this is true, something else I believe isn't true. And that doesn't mean they get triggered, but it's important to recognize that you're shaking people up. You're saying there are really important things you've believed all your life that you need to think about again from a new perspective, or you might have to abandon those ideas. So just recognizing that is helpful. And the final thing is just holding the context of what kind of conversation you're having and the right expectation. So one of our colleagues, Greg Salmieri, makes the point, which I think is really good, is to recognize that when you're having a conversation with someone, what's realistic to expect as an outcome? Are you expecting them, you know, I believe in the virtue of selfishness. What do you think about that? And the first time you meet them, and by the end of it, you're going to come away believing the same thing I do? That's not realistic. I mean, this is a stranger. They've never heard of this before. But can you have a different expectation, which is, I have a view that's really new and interesting, and I want to tell you about my view. And you're not going to convince them of anything in 5 minutes. So the basic point to take is that there's a context for every conversation that you have. And we know with people that are close to you, or friends, you have multiple conversations. And then to understand that when you're dealing with philosophic ideas, particularly challenging ones, it's a process. So I mean, I didn't read one Ayn Rand book and then was convinced, and I hope none of you will do that. I don't think one book should convince you. I mean, it's a very good book, and it should, but you need to really think about it. So it's not sufficient. So thinking about ideas is a process that you need to, like, why is she saying this? How does this fit? Is it true? In what way is this true? And how does this apply? So there's a whole bunch of thinking one has to do with any set of ideas, and especially radical ones. So just acknowledge and recognize that communicating with other people and for them to learn something, it's a process. It takes time, there are steps. And then you can, if you have that, you can say, well, I'm going to move the conversation in these kinds of steps with these expectations. And that's one important way in which you can prevent people, minimize the challenge of them shutting down and being defensive. So I hope those are helpful for you.
Thank you.
Hi. So I really enjoyed the talk on free will and determinism, but it got me thinking about individuals who might be suffering with mental illnesses, who might have bipolar episodes, for example, or people who have chemical imbalance, and how that might affect their free will in the same way that they can't choose to think rationally at all times, for example, and how that also affects outsiders who are with these people when that happens.
So it's certainly not my area of expertise, but I think those issues can and do affect it, but they can affect it in various kinds of ways. So I think there are some psychological and psychiatrical issues that can affect all the way down to the primary choice about being able to put your mind fully engaged and so on. I think the more typical kind of case is they have some control or full control over that, but that's we call it in Objectivism the primary choice. It's not the only choice you have. It's the root of the control you have. But when you're exercising that control, you have all kinds of further choices that you have to engage in. And if you're say at work and engage in trying to solve a problem, there's a whole series of direction that you're doing by making particular choices about, okay, I've got to do this now, and I'm having real trouble with this, so should I set it aside? Or is this so important that I really have to focus on this aspect of the problem until I solve it? But maybe if I let it stew a little bit in my mind and do some of the easier stuff that I'm working on, I might come to an answer easier. And you have all kinds of decisions that you're making, and these are all choices. And I think for many of the psychological issues can be, it's really difficult to do the later, even if you set your mind in motion. Now to fully control it and engage in a thought process, and there's not stuff pulling you away, or you have real trouble concentrating. So I think there's all kinds of things that can go wrong in regard to that, and this is part of why there's a whole profession and a whole science of psychology that's studying this, and how then can you help people? Is there ways to help them both through psychological issues, but some is psychiatrical. They've got issues about the brain and so on, that they need drugs. And it's a very complex field, and philosophy doesn't give you answers to this kind of thing. It gives you some things, it gives you a framework in terms of thinking about it, but then you have to do the actual science and that's, I have no expertise in that.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much first for being here. My question concerns really philosophy of objectivism, and I think Ayn Rand is really inspiring philosopher to me. But my problem with objectivism is, although I agree that existence exists, I don't think that moral values are part of existence in the way as physical facts or the universe exist. I think they're just constructions of our mind, of our consciousness. And I wonder, or maybe I just don't understand, but I don't know how we can actually demonstrate that this philosophy is not just an opinion, it's actually a fact. And so, yeah, can you maybe shed some light on this?
No, yes. I mean, I think so. So it depends what you think of as moral facts. I mean, there's a whole problem in philosophy. I mean, some people will say that moral skepticism, that there are no such things as moral facts. But often what the conception of a moral fact is, it's some kind of piece of the furniture of the world. It's kind of out there, independent of our judgments or our choices and stuff, and it's out there like a planet or what. I mean, they don't think about it like that, but in that sense. And I think you're looking for the answer in the wrong place if that's how you think about it, because there aren't there. And then you look around and you look under the bush, and there's no facts, and you say, look, there are no moral facts, and so on. But I think moral facts are just regular old garden variety facts, evaluated in relationship to the choice to live, evaluated in relationship to human life. So what is the value significance? So it's a relationship. I think a value is a relationship concept. It's the concept of some fact in relationship with an organism's choice to live in a way. So it's what is the impact on this, pro or con, to my life? So that's what a moral fact is, but it's a relational thing. It's not that you're going to look around, we lift up a rock and you're going to find one, and it's part of the furniture of the world, independent of us. So so you said it's a construct or something, but sort of, but not really. So in other words, we have to identify what moral facts are, and that's that identification is an act of consciousness, and we have to come to know and understand what they are, in the absence of human life, there are no moral values. So they don't just pre-exist in the world. And so if you think of moral facts as there's something intrinsic or inherent in the fabric of the world, independent of our choices and so on, they aren't there. But they're not a special kind of fact. Kind of queer. There's an article called, he calls them a queer, or like odd, in the sense of odd. The kind of like an odd fact, the kind of different, mysterious, sort of spooky, as they say dismissively, like something mysterious or mystical. And there's nothing mystical. They're just regular old facts. This is a value. And the moral fact is it's a value to my life. If I'm choosing to live, there's a relationship this has to that choice and then to my life in relation to that. So that's how I would answer it.
Thank you very much.
Hello. My questions will consider probably like the issues of promoting the ideas of objectivism, and it was good said like how to promote rational ideas into irrational world. You see, like maybe on my mind, it's looking like that sometimes we objectivists and the champion of capitalism, that sometimes we are like acting like ostriches, because we just hide our head into the sand from existing problem, because it's sometimes looking like we deny the existence. Like I'm deeply convinced like that the poverty are real, the human sufferings are real, the climate change also is real, and the human caused the extinction of species is also real. But what is the point? That capitalism is much more effective, much more successful in solving these problems than other possible concepts. Like we can take an example of like socialistic Vietnam and capitalistic Sweden. Despite they deny them, they are capitalist. We can just look where people do live better, and also we can take socialist Greta Thunberg and like capitalist Elon Musk. And I think it's obvious that because that Elon Musk he approached us towards the cease of fossil fuel, towards the stop of its usage much.
What is the question?
Like
at the end
the question is like maybe we should change the perspective, not just and actually like do you agree with such approach, and maybe we should change the conception in this way?
I think I get the question. Okay. So let me see if I can summarize it briefly. And if it's the right question, we'll try to answer it. If not, you can go back and follow up. So are you asking that would it be more effective to spread objectivist ideas if we made the case not that there's no climate change, but that capitalism is better at solving it?
Yes, exactly. Like
okay.
We are the solution.
I see. Well, I think capitalism is the solution, but I don't think the characterization is right that we are, I don't know who's the we, but I don't think we have our heads in the sand in the sense that we don't recognize real problems in the world. I think it's not clear that the claims made about species or about the climate or about poverty in the context in which they're made are accurate claims. Now, I'm concerned with facts. And if there are real problems in the world, I think the solution is a free society and people finding the ways to do that. But I don't think you justify capitalism by accepting a whole context, a whole value context that comes from environmentalism, and then saying, yeah, everything they say is true and we can solve it. Because there's a real question of what are they claiming, and is it true? And some of the things that are being claimed, like about the climate, I think the climate is super complicated. I think there are facts about the change of climate over time. I think there's real scientific questions. And there's also political questions. I think it's a mistake to say, oh yeah, we all know this is all true. What claim are you making about the climate that we're all supposed to agree with? Because it's not true that all scientists agree with all the claims about the climate. There's real debate about what is it that we're detecting in these changes over time. So if anything, I think more knowledge is needed about these things than is usually admitted. And things like poverty, I think it's, particularly in terms of defending capitalism, Ayn Rand pointed out, yes, if you're really concerned with human suffering and poverty, you should be for capitalism. But that's not the fundamental defense for it. That's not the fundamental justification for it, because that assumes a whole value context, that your concern should be with alleviating poverty and with need. The fundamental justification for capitalism is that it is the system appropriate for human beings because we need freedom in order to use our mind to create and thrive for our own interests. And it also happens to be true that when that's the system you have, everyone benefits. And people who are poor become less poor. And we've seen that. That's validated. So I hope that was the right question that I kind of reframed. But my point is, I think it's a mistake to accept a whole value context that comes from these issues in the culture, like climate, poverty. I think that the whole question of what's going on with poverty around the world, it's scary how little people actually know what's going on in the sort of the positive trends that are happening. But don't just accept a whole value package and say, oh yeah, I can solve that with capitalism, because it's not right to think that way. You have Ayn Rand was arguing for a moral defense of capitalism, and you have to understand why she has that view. And it was not because she wanted to be the best at saving the poor people. She wanted to be the best at making life possible for the best people in the world who want to be free and prosper. So I'll offer that.
Thanks.
This question is a little bit more technical and related to love. In the Fountainhead work said, to say I love you, one must first know how to say the I. As I understand it, to love one first needs self-esteem, and to value others, one has to value oneself first. But is it possible and rational to value other people above yourself? Because in Atlas Shrugged, John Galt said he would kill himself if the looters tortured Dagny, which suggests he values Dagny above his own life. So is it possible and is it rational?
I think in the case of, plot spoilers, I'll just say this briefly. In the case of John Galt and Dagny Taggart, I think that was an act of loyalty to his own values, not that he regards, that he values Dagny more than he values himself. I think he values himself so much that that's how he would behave. So that's the case of Dagny. And then you said, is it possible to value someone more than yourself? I don't know. Okay, let me just speak off the cuff. Well, this is all off the cuff. This is off the rails. No, this is off the cuff here, but it's, what does it mean to value the other person? It's to say they're important to you, that they're admirable by your own moral standards. And that and part of that is that you value them as you regard them as important to your life. Why do you care about your own life? I don't know. It may be possible. I don't know if that's I don't know how to think about that exactly. I'd have to think about that. Can you? Because it's possible. It's imaginable to me that somebody could. Yeah, I value somebody more than myself. I have low self-esteem, but something in you. You have to value enough to, I think, and this is you have to be able to say the I before you can say I love you. You have to know what it is that you value and why those things are important. And that's what helps you come into a relation with somebody else, that you say, no, you're important to me because you represent moral values that are important to me, that I recognize are good for myself. And so there's a certain kind of self-understanding and also, I think, self-valuing that's involved in that process.
Maybe just to add, maybe a different flavor is that there are things that I would risk my life for. There are values that will justify me to risk my life for, because again, it's a principle, it's something I think it's very high in my priority of values. So if that is what you're asking for, I think those are the cases where, yeah.
So what would that mean, that you have more important values than yourself?
No,
it can be rational.
It's important to me. So I see it as a hierarchy of values. My life, the fact that I live, is in a way the standard of value, right? But if your question is, are there things worth me risking my life for? Yes, there are some things that are that important to me. Yeah. So
thank you.
Thank you. So how many people are in line? I think I see 3, is that right? Okay, yeah. So you guys get to be the last 3 people to ask questions, and what I'm going to ask you to do is we'll get all the questions on the table, and then we'll try to answer them all sort of in a row. So if you could give us your question in brief form. Thank you. Okay.
Hello. It was mentioned today that many speakers were surprised to find out that this philosophy is controversial, and I think the reason is to be found in the moral foundations and the ethics mainly. So my question concerns that. So doesn't objectivist approach omit the psychological perspective that, to put it simply, rationality is not the only basic human trait based on which we achieve fulfillment, and people find meaning and thus satisfaction and happiness, call it whatever you want, in their lives by taking responsibility to take care of and help others. And what then puts anyone in the position to pass a judgment and say that it's not true fulfillment? And if it is, how is it less noble than anything else? And the other question would be, where, if anywhere, is the place of empathy in Ayn Rand's philosophy? Thank you.
So if I could just summarize that before you leave. So the first part was, we put emphasis on rationality, but is that compatible with getting satisfaction and from serving and helping other people? And then the second element was, what place is there, if any, for empathy? Does that capture it? Okay, so we can remember. Okay, next question.
What are your thoughts on applying objectivist ideas to the subset of mental health issues that could be caused by, the inaccurate cognitive processes? For example, like the working people getting depressed because they're not realizing their full potential, or young people, the millennial generation, who, like their emotions are, overwhelming them, and they're being told by their universities to actually encourage the wrong thinking processes, and they could be getting more accurate tools to deal with this.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to mention about the relationship between Ayn Rand's morality and economics, and the point that I wanted to sort of make you consider or have your opinion on it is that if you accept that the philosophy is about living and the success of your life through reason, and that you necessitate freedom to that, in a way it becomes sort of obvious that a free economy must be successful, because it is based on those principles where it must be effective for your life, and as a consequence they should also be effective in the cooperation of different people. So I just want to get your opinion if you think that's a way that made people understand the application of why this freedom is so important in a political context.
All right, thank you. Why don't we start with the first question about rationality and helping other people, being satisfied and getting
empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, the question again was, which, sorry.
So we put emphasis on rationality, and the question was, who's in a position to judge people who say that from serving other people or helping other people they gain satisfaction, and how can that not be compatible or rational?
Well, I never said, well, if I did, I misspoke. I don't say that you don't get satisfaction from, I think that to say that would be ridiculous. I get satisfaction from helping people all the time. I'm a teacher. I mean, in any, you guys have jobs? I mean, so in any of the productive, like legitimate productive endeavors where you're producing value, other people will pay you for it. Nobody's wronged, in other ways. You're helping people get a coffee in the morning, and so on. I help people learn, hopefully, better about philosophy. So helping other people is enormously rewarding. But there's more to it than helping other people. It's, I'm enacting my own values. I'm becoming, I hope, more efficacious, better in terms of communicating and understanding ideas and helping people learn and so on. But it's not that there's a helping others and then somehow I'm abstracted from that or I'm unconnected. It's part of who I am and what I love. And so, yeah, you can get enormous satisfaction out of helping others. But it's another thing to say, who are you to say that a life of altruism can't lead to fulfillment? I think it's self-contradictory. It's because altruism is not just helping people. Altruism is surrendering the values that are important to you for something less important as an act of moral duty. And I think the idea of the concept of that would be fulfilling in any of the sense that we would even regard as fulfilling, where does it make any sense? That doesn't mean that in the process of thinking of yourself as a moral person because you're doing your duty to serve the community and it's not important to you, but you're doing your duty. There's a value in seeing yourself as a moral person. And there's a certain kind of positive feedback that you'll get as a result from that. But you shouldn't be getting positive feedback from that. That's not the right mechanism to set up in yourself. That's suicidal in the ways. Try to find personal satisfaction in thinking of yourself as throwing away your life. don't orient yourself like that. That's not the right thing to set up. And empathy, it's a good growth. Yeah, please.
So, yeah, empathy is a real phenomenon. Whenever, and for anyone who's attained a conceptual level where you can think a little abstractly and in terms of principles, then you get that what applies to me applies to other people as well. They're like me, I'm like them. And so you can put yourself in their shoes and you can see themselves in your shoes. And so you can emphasize with their predicament, with their plight, with their situation in life. But if we're putting it in a moral context, empathy has to be colored by justice. So, and part of the demands and pleas for empathy and sympathy is that it trumps justice. And in objectivism, nothing trumps justice. You should have empathy for people who are suffering through no fault of their own or who are suffering from injustices. And I brought up Les Miserables. Part of what I like about the story is Hugo's perspective of the underclass is treated unjustly, and this is something wrong, and we should empathize with these people, and they're too much just discarded as they don't count, they're not significant, and you're not actually thinking about their rights, you're not treating them justly. That is a moral perspective on empathy. But you don't have empathy for killers. You don't have empathy for the Nazis. I don't have empathy for any of the people who participated in the communist regimes and so on. And if you take justice seriously, you should have a different emotion in regard to it. It's not, I feel, oh, they're suffering and so on. They deserve it, and they should suffer. And that, if you think that there is free will and that there's choices and so on, that has to color the way you respond to other people and the way that you think of their plight. There's such a thing as they're suffering through no cause of their own, or they're suffering through the injustices committed by other people. And there's such a thing as people suffer because of what they're doing. And for some of them, I wish they suffered more. I mean, the Nazis, so many of them who fled and who escaped justice and so on, they did not get what they deserved. And I don't have any empathy for these people. And it's a moral context.
I think the next question was what reactions do we have to applying objectivism to psychotherapeutic situations, and particularly with students, and helping them avoid bad thinking patterns that lead to bad kind of emotional situations. I'm not a psychologist, but if someone's working on that, I think that would be a positive thing, and I think there's a real demand for sort of innovative thinking in psychology that is informed by rational ideas. And I think that because I think if you can solve those things, you can make people's lives a lot better. And just to connect to the panel we had on Ayn Rand in Europe and scholarship and so forth, someone was asking about new things people could be working on. I think there's so many things that intellectuals and scholars and academics, people informed by Ayn Rand's ideas, are doing right now, and that they should be doing. So if any of you are inspired to work in an intellectual field, there is so much work to be done. I mean, psychology is one field, history is another. I work in policy, foreign policy, and various kind of contemporary issues in the culture. There's just more work than I can ever do in my lifetime. And we have a journal at the Institute where we have more topics we want to write on than people to write about them. So if you want to be someone who does that kind of work, we would love to hear from you. So I think if you guys want to add to that, no? So let's take the final question, which if I can summarize it, and raise your hand and shout if I didn't quite capture it. But I think it was a question about how to communicate about the efficacy of capitalism, how it works, and that since reason works in the case of an individual, it would work well in collaboration. Is that a good summary? Okay, thumbs up. Any reactions to that from you guys on?
So I had only two thoughts about that. One was that if you've discovered that there's a fact about human beings let's say on an individual level, that what the mind and the creative mind and the productive mind needs is freedom, you can extrapolate to, this for society. But it's how do you get at the universal principle, right? So it's not that you observe one person needs the freedom and then you'd say, so if everybody was doing that, It wouldn't be a deductive move from one to the other. I think what you'd have to do is actually move inductively, go the other way. You'd have to actually observe societies that live differently and they live at different levels of freedom to make the move to, you know, there's something going on here. There's a phenomenon here where you jack up the freedom and you jack up innovation and productivity and standard of living and stuff, and the more and more you dial it down, it gets poorer and so on. You'd have to try to think. You couldn't just look at one person and say, for you it works, so it must be that if everyone lived like that. I don't think you can make that move. But I think the way in which you find out that it's good for man as such, or human beings as such, is you have to look at reality and societies and how life goes and why, and trying to establish a causal relationship between freedom and the kind of products of thought and so on, and in a social context, because that's what we're talking about and trying to extrapolate toward.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Onkar, and thanks, Tao.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to never miss a video.